I'm going to introduce Chad and get us going here. So just to give you an idea of how the flow of the evening will go, Chad's going to present first, followed by Matt, and then we'll take a little break, and then we'll have time for our polylog. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chad Harris, who is a practicing archetypal astrologer in San Francisco. He's been studying astrology for 19 years. He is truly Rick Tarnas' right-hand man. He's been working with Rick and Stan Grof for many, many years, videotaping anything they've taught or any way that they've interacted together. And he's a wonderful contributing member of the PCC community on so many levels, and building community and documenting and just being a general awesome human. So without further ado, let's welcome Chad. Yay, Chad. Okay, good luck.
Hi. Oh, that sounds pretty loud. Better? I guess you guys can hear me. So, yes, welcome. This is my second ERIE presentation, and I'd like to thank Larry for inviting us back again, Matt and I. So, quick question. Who was here for on the January 14th for Carl Rook and Mark Hoffman's presentation? Just a few people. Okay, so they gave a really awesome presentation on psychedelics and or entheogens and the origins of religions. And Mark Hoffman had a quote during that talk where he said that all literary traditions, all literary religions that we know of have a mystical or psychedelic experience at their origin. So I'd just like to start with that, and I felt like that was an important quote I took from that lecture. And this is, what I'm going to do really quick is, hopefully, is show how the evolution of consciousness through humanity's evolution is similar to the evolution of one human lifetime. And then I'm going to try and show how the astrological perspective actually can provide a pretty amazing synthesis to these things and to our future, hopefully. So, to begin, this is a diagram that Richard Tarnas has developed that he's been teaching for the past couple of years, which is kind of showing a mandala in a sense of the way that this is the primal, it starts here. This is, in a sense, this is the human self is in the primal, like, shamanistic cultures when we were first or arriving as humanity. It was a mystical, unified understanding of our relationship to the cosmos, to nature. The red lines are seen as meaning and purpose, and the self here is dotted, you see, so it's like permeable. There is meaning seen in nature and meaning in the human. And then as we developed out of shamanistic primal cultures into the archaic development, it's where civilization took place and our agriculture developed, we started to kind of move into hierarchical kind of orientations towards things. The king was, or the pharaoh was the leader to the divine kind of thing, or the shaman in that sense, where before that it was more everyone and everything was part of nature and everything was seen as meaning. So the axial period is a pretty well-established historical understanding of an ascent of monotheism cross-culturally. The Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Pythagoras, Thales is the beginning of ancient Greece. Plato follows that. And what happens there is it seems to be as though the human being projects divinity that was previously seen as inanimate in nature into the heavens. And we begin to align ourselves with a transcendent understanding of divinity and mirroring ourselves like God, made man in his own image kind of thing. And what happens along with this period, I guess I should say, obviously, the shamanistic cultures, and what I started with the quote from Mark Hoffman, psychedelics are at the origin of our kind of mystical understanding of the transcendent. In the axial period, and I'm going to focus a little bit on the Western history out of Greece, and Plato was initiate into the Eleusinian mysteries that Karl wrote the book with Albert Hoffman on. And what's fascinating about Plato and his understanding of the transcendent is that there is an eternal perfection and order to the cosmos. And what's happening here also we should recognize is that the Earth is seen as the fixed center. It is not moving, it is stationary. Everything else is moving around the Earth. So at this time, what's happening when you watch the planets is they have retrograde motions, and this is considered wandering. Planet in Greek actually means wanderer. So they're wandering in the sense relating to the fixed stars in the backdrop. And Plato had a conviction that this wandering motion was not actually wandering. It was actually, there was a simple, elegant mathematical reason for why they would do this seemingly erratic motions. And so he put forth that the problem of the planets to the astronomers, astrologers, philosophers at the time to figure this out. And what happened is it took 2,500 years for this to take place, and it was at the Copernican revolution, which is actually the most significant event in history in a sense because the human mind figured out something that all the previous religions and modes of knowledge were telling us was true, that in that they were saying that we were the center of the universe, and the human mind figured out that we weren't. This is a giant achievement for the evolution of human consciousness, to recognize something that was being told to us that wasn't true, and also seems, in the sense of your perception, to be obviously false. The understanding was that if the Earth was spinning, the trees would be falling down. But in fact, the Earth is spinning really fast and the trees are not falling down. But it goes against your perception to see that that's the case. So what takes place with the Copernican revolution is I want to say that, yeah. We here, so the red lines are of meaning we put into the heavens, and then in the modern period at the Copernican revolution, at that point, what happens is we figured out something superior to everything that come before. So what takes place is we absorb all the meaning, the red lines, into this, which is just the human speck of dust, in the sense that is what the postmodern perspective renders, that we are just an isolated sense of consciousness in a vast, meaningless cosmos. So we, prior to this, meaning is transcendent and it's inanimate, and then we take it out and put it all into our minds, and the cosmos is seen as devoid of meaning. So let me try and make this clear with... That's Gebser's stages of consciousness, which also layers on this, but it's not important. So what I was going to try and describe is that if you look at the evolution that I just described and think about that in the sense of one human life, you can see this as infancy. We are just primally, needing the mother for survival. And, at toddler stage, you kind of get object-oriented understanding of things, and that's kind of what civilization is doing. And then toddler, you kind of, mom is the source, and mom is telling you you're the center. You feel like you're the center of everything. And what happens often at adolescence is a sense of figuring out things that mom and dad don't know, and realizing truths that seem to be superior to what you've been told. And this is a little bit like what happened at the Copernican revolution. We figured out something that mom and dad were telling us was true, and it wasn't. So this is basically what forges the secular age. The American and French revolutions come directly out of the Copernican revolution because of the ability to challenge authority, because the human mind had figured out that we weren't the center of everything. It gave us the capacity to challenge the king, to challenge the pope, to challenge all authorities that existed, because we seemed to think that we knew more than they did. And if you think about in Jungian psychology, or in the Campbellian hero's journey sense, what's taking place is it's like the initiate going out into the wilderness, facing the dark night. We've created a wilderness of 13-billion-year-old cosmos that has no meaning at all, and we are the only purpose and meaning. I mean, it's like we've created a vastness that is much more vast than any initiate and in any indigenous culture could have experienced. So our whole culture has created a vast, alienated situation, and a sense of dark night of the soul that we're all facing. And in the Jungian sense, what takes place after that, hopefully, is the individuation process, where you find your gift, you find your unique capacity to give back to the community through your dark night, through your hero's journey, and then you find a way of embodying that in the whole, so that the whole can benefit rather than just yourself. And so this is where I'm sure I'm leaving things out, and I'm sure it'll be worked out in the dialogue. So this is where what I think may be happening is potentially this whole process potentially was like, in the sense that we were aligning ourselves with a sense of divinity, in the same way that you have mimesis towards your parents. We are, striving to align ourselves with a sense of perfection or divine or better, I mean, something better. And we've gone through this evolution that, I guess I should say this really quick. Astrology and astronomy were the first science. It was a single science. We were simply trying to understand who we were and where we were. First it's day and night, then it's the months, then it's the seasons, and you're literally just trying to understand who you are and what's happening around you. So it's an astrological perception before astronomy divides and becomes its own science. So in that sense, the meaning is saturated in the universe here, and we move through this, but, this is the really important part. Not only did we disenchant the cosmos by, devoiding meaning and going into the postmodern, we also forged individuality. Through the American and French revolutions, really, and after the Copernican revolution, it allows us to claim a sense of individuality that is separate from everyone else and separate from nature, separate from the whole, in a sense that we forged a partner ultimately. But what potentially may be happening now is that we had to figure out the correct mathematics, in that we're not the center of the universe. We had to get that right first, and that was a giant leap. It's the most significant event in history, actually, because Eric Vogelin, a scholar of history, describes events in history as significant in the sense that describing a distinct before and after. And there's no more distinct before and after event, more distinct than the Copernican revolution, because we'll never go back to thinking we were the center of the universe, in the sense that the Earth was the center and that the sun orbits around us. We'll never go back to that. In a sense, like, what's considered the most significant event in history prior to this is actually the axial period, where the monotheistic kind of understanding that is pulling all of our trajectory towards monotheistic religions, that's actually considered to be the most significant event in history by many scholars, but the Copernican revolution is, in my mind, the most significant event in that sense because it is the most distinct before and after. We could potentially go back to a polytheistic perspective. We'll never go back to thinking we're the center in that sense. And what I think also is crucially important is the discovery of the 3 outer planets. The astrological perspective is not full, it's not fulfilled, it's not a complete picture without first knowing that the Earth's not the center, but then discovering the 3 outer planets. They correlate to the deepest parts of our psyche. And so it was really important for us to discover them, and they also show how cultural history is reflected in the movements of the planets. So this is a crucial evolutionary step that we had to go through at the same time that we forged the autonomous individual. So, and disenchanted the cosmos, suppressed the feminine, suppressed nature. All of those things are taking place. But what may be happening, this is my hope, is that we are recovering the meaning and purpose that we devoided ourselves of in the postmodern that we're in today, that the postmodern perspective describes the universe without a sense of ground of meaning and purpose that you can measure things against. Everything is interpretive, everything is relational. There's nothing that you can actually measure things in an empirical way against in objectivity. And what I believe is actually taking place is that the human psyche is actually not just in here, it's actually commensurate with the movements of the largest patterns in nature we're aware of, which are the movements of the planets. We are not separate from them in the same way that quantum physics describes the universe as a field of inseparable parts. You can't take any part of the cosmos out of it and measure it in and of itself. You have to measure it in relationship to what it's next to. So there's no part of the universe that's separate in and of itself. It's all a connected whole. And so it's really just a matter of extending our capacity for relativity, really, to recognize that we're not separate from the whole, which actually includes the movements of the planets. And what is really fascinating on many levels is that it's been with us the whole time. But it wasn't correct. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't complete. We didn't have the full picture. And we had to go through this process in order to realize it. And so it's a really difficult process, and we're probably going to go through a lot more difficulties before we reconnect back to it. I totally left out a big part of the headline of this talk, and I'm going to go through it really fast. Time. Okay. So in the title, it's LSD, the evolution of consciousness, and the astrological perspective. So, okay, where does LSD come in, right? What's really fascinating about LSD is it's actually a parallel to the atomic bomb. LSD was synthesized first in 1938. We split the atom in 1939. LSD sat in the freezer in Switzerland, right next to Germany, from 1938 through 43, right through the heart of World War II, while they were developing the atomic bomb. And then, they both have dramatically changed the world. LSD, Carl Ruck's presentation highlighted this, that Francis Crick he credits LSD to his ability to discover the spiral nature of DNA. Kary Mullis, the Nobel Prize-winning creator of the PCR machine, which is what replicates DNA, which makes all DNA research possible, also accredits his capacity to create that machine to LSD. Steve Jobs, Wozniak, there's so many people in the computer industry that have been affected by LSD that are literally our world, everything that is happening here on many levels is affected by it. And the astrological part is that Stan Grof did 13 years of legal LSD research from 1955 to 68, moved to Esalen. Rick Tarnas came to study with him, And in their research, they discovered that the astrological perspective gave them the best tool to gain insight into the character or the quality of a person's psychedelic experience at any given time, in the sense that they were curious, why would someone have a certain type of LSD experience on one day and have a very different experience 2 weeks later or 2 years later? Why would two people have very different experiences on the same day, etc.? And all this battery of psychological tests they had failed, and lo and behold, to their astonishment, the astrological perspective, and particularly transit astrology, meaning where the planets are at the time that you have an experience, seem to deeply color the experience itself. And so it gives you a tool to gain insight into the potential quality of an experience before you go into it. So this is where the astrological perspective really developed through their work and at the great aid of LSD that actually gave them insight into a deeper understanding of the character of the archetypes themselves. When you witness someone in a psychedelic experience, their ego is not as present. They're a more vivid embodiment of their natal chart and the archetypes present there and the transits that they have. So when you witness someone in experience and you know what their transits are, you can actually see the archetypes expressing themselves through that individual's experience. And so it gave them a window, a tool into seeing the archetypes themselves. They also had their own experiences that gave them deeper insight into them as well. So LSD deeply aided this talk and what we're going to talk about here. So I guess I'm sure there's things I'm leaving out, but I guess the main thing I just want to say is that you can see, Joseph Campbell had a quote where he said, there's not been a new heliocentric mythology, a mythology that characterizes the heliocentric paradigm correctly or, well. And what I think may be also happening here is that in the birth chart, in your natal chart, the sun is your central sense of identity, and it's correlative to the hero in us. It represents the hero that is, in a sense, you can also, I was describing it as evolution, it's like this is the cradle, and it's like we're moving towards the grave on some level, but in that process, in the same way, the human life, it ascends and it goes down. But there's a certain wisdom that's gained in going down. And it seems as though this process has been a matter actually of recognizing our own divinity. We had it here, we saw it, synchronicities were part of the understanding. The winds, if eagles would fly, you would see meaning in these things. And then we placed all the meaning into the heavens, and we saw the world as like samsara, it's just change and death and it's dying. And then when it's the self, but what's happening is we're actually striving to recognize our own divinity. We place that understanding in the heavens, and we see the heavens as eternal and certain perfection and order in them. And then what seems to actually be happening is that that's actually not separate from us. This is a process really of realizing our own divinity, recognizing that we're not separate from the divine itself. And this is actually a tool that allows us to see how we're connected to the whole. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but maybe it'll come through clearer in the dialogue, if not. So I think I'm going to leave it there.